Welcome to the first curriculum committee of 2024 and our first in the evening. Welcome to our brand new committee meeting, committee members. And I have Sarah here, who's my new co-chair. We are going to get started with our presentation for the evening, which is all about GPA and weighted grades. So take it away.
So I'm going to just step in before Jason starts. So
Call from Kimberly Garrison.
Hi, Kimberly, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
Great, if you can just go ahead and mute it, we're just getting started.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
So weighted grading, GPA graduation credits have been discussions in the district for a while, actually part of our strategic plan, the strategic pathway, redefining success. This has been part of a discussion piece that pre-COVID, the board had discussions about with administration, and as one of the focus exploration areas, Sean Hughes, our former principal at Lower Merion, really led the work and then transitioned it over to Jason Lilly prior to my arrival. So Jason's been a piece of this whole entire conversation for a long time. When I arrived in the school district, we started having these conversations, made some adjustments, knew we needed to come back to this area, and finally we were able to do that over the last couple of years. As you'll see, it's taken us a little while to feel like we were in a good place to come to the school board and make a recommendation, and Jason's primarily led that work. So I thank him for all the work that he's done alongside with our high school principals, our department chairs, myself. And so we're going to talk to you about recommendations that we would like to make with regard to weighted grades and GPA, and then graduation credits towards the end as well. Thanks, Jason.
So thank you. As Dr. McGloin shared, this has been a process over a long period of time. This slide just kind of gives you snippets of what that looked like. The star at the bottom says how this has been going on since before COVID ever hit. And this has been something, you know, I've been leading this since around 2018. And here we are many years later with, you know, a little bit of an interruption in between. But we've come to the point where we do want to share some of the process and also some of our recommendations. There have been lots of different meetings along the way. The high school principals certainly have been involved, our leadership, teachers at the different buildings, and lots of conversation because all of these topics are things that people are very passionate about. So we're at a point where we want to share our findings and also our recommendations, but this is some of the process and how we got to where we are today. Next slide. So there are three parts to this presentation tonight. They are all kind of connected. The first we're going to talk about is weighted grades. Then we're going to transition to GPA, what we do now and what we are proposing, and then we'll wrap up by talking a little bit about graduation credits, which will be the shortest part of the presentation. Next slide. All right, so we're going to jump into weighted grades first. There are a couple parts to this. We'll talk about, you know, what we do now, what we kind of talked about along the way, and the recommendations going forward. Next slide.
Call from
Okay. So we started this by really taking a look at what other districts do as far as weighting of grades. And as we typically do here, we compare to some of the schools that always show up when we're comparing achievement and things like that. But we looked at Radnor, we looked at TE, we looked at some of our neighboring schools like Upper Merion and Wissahickon. And then we also compared the practices of some of the schools out in the Pittsburgh area that are similar to Lower Merion, like Upper St. Clair and North Allegheny. I want to spend a little bit of showing you what's on this because this slide will pop up a couple times throughout the presentation, and just having a sense of what we see here is important, and seeing some of the differences between Lower Merion and what we currently do versus surrounding schools and other schools like us across the state. So in the very first column, the gray column, that is an unweighted GPA. This is what students would achieve based on performance in the class and teacher evaluation of that performance. In green, this is how we currently weight our honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. Lower Merion adds a +1, which is essentially one letter grade, to a student's average in that course for simply taking that course at that level. So students who take honors AP, IB, and DE, they get a +1 added to their final grade for the course. Looking at some of the other schools, even those that are close to us, Radnor adds a .333, so 1/3 of a letter grade. TE does things differently for honors versus AP. You'll see that through some of the other schools. Upper Marion and Wissahickon and Upper St. Clair, you'll see some red on those lists because in those schools, they have decided that performance typically below a C isn't deserving of getting additional weight added to their grades. So these are just some of the things going on around us, and these are some of the things we considered as we tried to rethink how we're doing what we're doing, because we do notice here that our weighting is significantly higher than any of the other school districts locally and compared to those in the Pittsburgh area who are very similar demographic-wise and achievement-wise to Lower Marion. Next slide. So when we pulled that together, that was shared to our staff at the high schools, and we asked teachers, looking at this, would you be open to adjusting the way we currently weight our courses? And what you see overwhelmingly from the teacher response was, they said, yes, we would like to kind of explore this, rethink this, and see, can we maybe think about this differently? And again, that was part of our redefining success pathway. So we're always looking to do things different and better. So this is what we dug into. This was our initial, dive into this sort of thing. Next slide. Later on, we did a teacher and student survey. So this was further down the timeline. But we used the Likert scale. And this statement was simply, do you believe that the +1 influences student choices for the courses they decide to take? And what you see here on the teacher side is that overwhelmingly the teachers believe students are making choices based on that +1. And to a large degree, the students agreed and said, yes, we do. So you see parallel responses here from the teacher side and the student side. Next slide. So revisiting this, share this out again to teachers and say, okay, well, you think students are choosing courses because of the way we weight grades, and students are saying that that is, to a large degree, something that we're doing. Look at what other schools like us are doing or what similar schools are doing, and are there certain models that you feel more strongly about than others? Start to look for things that you think might be more aligned with what we have going on here, and maybe a system where it doesn't as strongly influence what students are choosing to take. The other thing that I'm going to say here before we move on to the other slides is that +1 does create a really large gap for our students who don't take AP, honors, IB, or DE courses. So someone who strictly takes college prep courses, they immediately are a +1, a full letter grade behind peers who do take those classes simply because of the choices they take. Next slide. So again, running through the Likert scale, and I'll just highlight on this one. The top two bars are strongly disagree and disagree, and the bottom two bars are agree and strongly agree. There was a neutral option, so people could choose not to kind of say one way or the other. But in this one, I believe all courses should have the same weight. Again, this went to teachers and students. So one of the things we considered is not weighting courses at all. Now, you don't see that in that chart, but we did put everything on the table, and one of the things we talked about was unweighting all courses, so everything just counts the same. So when we posed that question to the students and the teachers, overwhelmingly, the majority felt that that is not what we should do. They didn't feel we should unweight all the courses and make everything be the same. Next slide. So then we asked the question, do you then think that honors AP, IB, and DE courses, dual enrollment, should be weighted more than college prep? And again, here you see the blue bar and the orange bar stand out, especially on the student side. Students felt very strongly that if they're willing to try, honors AP, IB, and DE, that they should be recognized in some way for that effort because of the rigor of those courses. And for the most part, teachers agreed. We had about a little less than 30% of the teachers that said they didn't feel that way. Next slide. So then going a step further, do we believe that AP, IB, and DE, so your AP courses, International Baccalaureate courses, and dual enrollment, should they be weighted more than an honors class? And again, what you see here from the teachers and the students is they largely do believe that AP, IB, and DE courses should be weighted more than honors level courses. And in most cases in our program guide, those courses, AP, IB, and DE, typically follow students who've taken an honors course prior. Not in all instances, but for the most part, these are students who are taking honors level courses and then they finish off by taking AB, IB, and DE. IB is a little bit of an exception, but in a lot of instances, honors courses precede these courses. So our teachers and students both felt, that's okay, they both felt that that was something that should be recognized. Go ahead. So when we go back to what are other schools doing, we pared it down and said, okay, if we believe that honors should be weighted a little different than AP, IB, and DE, what schools had the two-tier system with different weighting for those two levels of courses? And so the ones that stayed in the mix here were TE, then we had Wissahickon, both local, and North Allegheny from the Pittsburgh area. So they had the two-tier systems. When we look at their systems, they're very different. TE actually multiplies by a percentage instead of just adding on to the grade, whereas North Allegheny has similar numbers, but they're just adding those on. One of the other things that some of our staff members didn't really like when we looked at these systems is they didn't like that some of these in the other systems came out to 3 and 4 decimal places for a grade for a course, right? So you see the Wissahickon, they all come out kind of clean, similar to what we see here. But looking at the different numbers here, we kind of came out somewhere in between. And we kind of landed with a 0.15 for honors courses and then a 0.25 for AP, IB, DE. So we kind of blended multiple systems to make it kind of be what we want to be. So we didn't wholly adopt any system or recommend any system. So go to the next slide, please. Based on that, we asked the question, do you think if we changed to a plus 0.15 for honors and a plus 0.25 for AP, IB, and DE, would you take or would students take the same number of honors, AP, IB, and DE courses as they do now? So in other words, getting rid of or changing that +1 to a much smaller amount, would that largely or greatly impact the courses students take? And what we found is students and teachers, for the most part, felt that they would still take the same number as now. However, 20% of students said they would likely not take the same number of AP, IB, DE, or honors level courses, which means that about 20% of our students, again, based on this survey, those that participated, feel that the bump is really why they were choosing those courses. Without the +1, that 20% weren't as willing to just choose those courses. And we know that influences some of the decision. It's only a piece of it, but it does. And so that 20% is what came out from our survey of being the group that would be a little different if we changed the system. Next slide. So to talk a little more into the course selection process, other things that happen along the way. And this is especially important if you don't have someone who, or a student who is in the high school. This is our process right now. But students can choose any level of a course that's available. We don't have gatekeepers or prerequisites. We have recommendations. So students will look at a recommendation. It'll say something like, it's recommended that you have a certain grade in a previous course before taking this course, but it's not required. It's just recommended. It's there to suggest. So that's what the prerequisite recommendations look like. They see that, and it's partly there to help them guide their choices. Teachers also do recommend courses for students. So for example, if a student was in a course like Integrated Math 3, they might be recommended to take pre-calc the next year. They might also be recommended to take statistics. Again, students don't have to follow the recommendation. They can override. They could take an honors level of pre-calc. They could take AP statistics. So again, it's there to guide their choices, but it doesn't in any way limit them from what they can and can't take. So they don't have to follow that. The weighting of courses, though, based on our survey results, does appear in part to influence those decisions and that process. So that's what's important coming out of the survey. Next slide. So based on those findings and the feedback we have, the recommendation is to adjust the weighting of grades to plus 0.15 for our honors courses and plus 0.25 for AP, IB, and DE courses. I'm just going to note here too that the state did now require that our dual enrollment courses be weighted the same way as AP courses. You cannot distinguish the difference there. So they need to be weighted the same. Whatever we decide that is, they have to be weighted the same way. So what this does, this change, is it still recognizes the additional rigor that often accompanies an AP, IB, DE, or an honors level course, but it does close the gap that exists right now simply by the course you choose. So instead of being a +1 difference between students just because of the choice you make for what course you want to take, that difference will now be no more than a 0.25 difference. The hope here too is that knowing the influence it has now, taking away that +1, hopefully helps students choose courses that are more aligned with either their interests or a course that's more appropriately for them at that particular level with where they're at. Next. So we're going to shift into GPA calculation. Same thing, kind of results along the way, what we found, and recommendations going forward. Next slide. First question, very basic but very important. Do you believe GPA is important? What came out of that? Teachers and students both felt GPA is important. We know that it is. It's the first thing they typically have to put on a college application, and it's on their transcript that gets sent to any colleges they apply for. So we know it's important. Next slide. Just to give you a little background on how our students typically perform, looking at last year's senior class, 83% of our graduates had over a 3.0 or better. Almost 60% of our students had a 4.0 GPA or better. Now remember, this is with the +1. So these grades have had a +1 influencing some of that number. Only 3% of our students had a GPA of 2.0 or below. So the majority of our students are above a 2.0, which is above a C average. Right now, and this is important, this is where kind of the meat of our discussions over the last 5 years have been. Right now, Lower Merion only uses math, science, English, social studies, and world language to determine a student's GPA. So regardless of what shows on that student transcript right now, those are the only courses that are used to calculate their GPA. So it's not necessarily reflective of all the courses that are on that transcript or all of the courses they've taken. This does create some equity challenges, especially if student strengths are outside of one of those 5 areas. And it's something we recognize. And again, when you think about the redefining success pathway, these are some of the things we talk about, and we try to recognize students for where their strengths are and make sure there's a level playing field. Next slide. So again, similar to the question, but a little bit different. Do you intentionally select courses that boost your GPA? Again, the +1 influence this. Teachers, for the most part, do feel that students are doing that. And this one looks a little bit different. It's almost like a bell curve on the student side. But again, I think when students are asked to complete a survey like this, even though this was completely anonymous, there's a little bit of a trust factor with answering a question like this, not being sure if someone's going to see that I answered it a certain way. But what we did find here is, right around 40% of students, a little more than 40% of students did say that they choose courses that intentionally boost their GPA. Next slide. Again, this was a hot topic of debate. Should all courses count towards the GPA? In other words, should all of the courses you take be represented in your GPA? Again, for the most part, with the exception of about 15, a little less than 15% of teachers felt that it should. And again, more students said yes, they should than those that did not. So all courses counting in GPA, my GPA is reflective of everything I've done. My body of work as a kid in high school should be shown and reflected in my GPA. So that's where both sides stood there. Next slide. This was an interesting question and interesting result. Because again, we didn't really have any idea one way or the other going into this. If we decided that we would count all courses towards the GPA, what would happen to the number of electives students take. And just for some background, what happens a lot here at Lower Merion is students will choose courses that count in their GPA because they want them to. So what will happen is, you might have students who take an additional science class instead of taking that art class they're interested in because the art class doesn't count in their GPA, and they want things that count in their GPA. So a lot of times that's what happens, or they take an additional AP course because that'll count in the GPA. Up until this past year, when the state changed that rule about dual enrollment, all of our dual enrollment courses are in our business department right now, and business is considered an elective. So up until the state changed the rule, we were not even counting our dual enrollment courses in a student's GPA. But what we found here, what's interesting, and it's circled in red there, is 50% of our students said, if you counted electives in my GPA, I would take more electives. So that's really interesting. And again, when we think about leveling the playing field and redefining success, if we can get students to be willing to take courses they're interested in and those electives rather than taking something else just because it counts in a GPA, I think we're doing kids a service. Next slide. So our recommendation about GPA is that we do move to have all courses that are on a student's transcript be part of their GPA. Again, their body of work as a student in high school should be counted and reflected. So that's our recommendation. This does help recognize the value of all courses that we offer here in the district. We don't value some more than others because right now the 5 cores tend to be valued or looked at differently than all of the other courses we offer. Doesn't matter what those courses are. Like I said, business courses that have the dual enrollment, they weren't even there until they had to be. Engineering courses aren't included, and none of our arts or things like that. So that's our recommendation, that we do make that change for GPA. Next slide. And the last portion, which I said would be the shortest portion, is about graduation credits. Go ahead, next slide. What we're sharing here is our kids that are seniors, they do senior project. So we have a senior project requirement at Lower Merion. The state used to have senior project as a requirement for all students to graduate in the state of Pennsylvania. That changed a few years ago. So districts, some of them, decided they weren't going to do that anymore. Other districts chose to continue that process because they see value in it. At Lower Merion, we see value in senior project, and we've decided to continue that. The state has a minimum requirement of 21 credits for a student to graduate. That's the state minimum. Lower Merion right now requires the state minimum of 21 credits for a student to graduate. Since the senior project is no longer a state requirement, it is not part of those 21 credits. So because that course, which we call a course, senior project at Lower Merion, which we count as a 0.5 credit, that course is not part of the 21 minimum credits required for students to graduate. So we do need to make a change there, and the change would simply move us from 21 credits required to graduate to 21.5 because we don't want to give that up. We want to keep that. So it just has a minimal impact on our student credit requirement of 0.5. It's something they already do. It doesn't change the number of courses they're taking right now or things like that, but it does have an additional 0.5 credit that it would add on for our students to graduate. So I said that part would be short, and it was. The 3 things that we're really bringing to the table tonight, first of all, is adjusting how we weight our courses to try to level the playing field to a 0.15 for honors courses and a 0.25 for AP, IB, and DE instead of the current plus 1.0. That we would phase in because some students are already in that system now, and we don't feel that it's right to take them out of a system they already are in. So that would happen in transition with the incoming 9th graders next year. The second thing we're recommending is that we do include all courses that a student takes in their GPA calculation. Again, that whole body of work being part of what's recognized as they move on to that next level. Same thing, we would phase that in with the incoming 9th grade class because again, there's already a GPA calculation and a system in place for kids who are in the high school. And the third piece that we're recommending here is we do make that adjustment to our graduation credits from 21 to 21.5, because of that senior project requirement that we have in place, and that is considered a local requirement. So that's something additional than the 21 that we are requiring as Lower Merion. That is something we can change for everyone because all students participate in senior project. So that's a change that we should make for all students going forward, starting next year. Should those changes move forward, there are 3 policies that would need some revision, so there becomes some policy work. That's the next step in the process here. There are 3 policies attached to this, one of which is the high school graduation requirements, the second one, which is grading, and the third one is reporting. So how we grade and report student progress, and then also the credits required to graduate. Those 3 policies would be our next body of work. And we are happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Excuse me, thank you so much. So for new folks, what we tend to do is let the non-chairs of the committee ask their questions first. We wait, and then we go to the community. So did you have any questions, Abby?
Hi, thank you very much.
Sure.
I have a couple of questions, and the first one is, so with your recommendation for moving forward, we would be rating grades the same, right? Even, there other districts had different grades starting at C, right? This would be across the board.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll try to answer that for you. We did not move forward with the recommendation that there was a cutoff for a certain grade to be recognized to have any kind of additional weighting. We felt that changing the weighting, lessening the weight in and of itself is something we would want to explore that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to clarify that. And then the other question I have is with regard to prerequisites. So from, I think it was slide 15, I might have been off, but was it ever a time where there were sort of hard and fast prerequisites where classes had to be successfully?
There were, but I would say that's well before my time of being here, and I'm in year 8 in the district. So at one point, there were prerequisites, whereas now they're recommendations.
Because maybe we should change the wording too, because having a prerequisite that isn't required seems a little bit confusing to me.
Yeah, in our course guide, it says recommendation. It doesn't say prerequisite, if I'm thinking correctly about that. Am I right?
I'd have to double check.
Yeah, but we'll look at that for sure.
I'm just
we can look at that.
responding to this because it's sort of the
Yep,
inconsistency.
understood.
But thank you.
I believe, honestly, I believe it says recommended prerequisite.
Okay. That might be a little bit too complicated. Yeah.
Yes.
Because just to sort of continue this question, if there is a recommended prerequisite and it's not taken and the student struggles in the class, I'm curious how that's sort of navigated and what happens.
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. It's handled in different ways. I mean, obviously, we try to support students every way that we can who are in that situation. We do have students, we call it overriding. So if you override a recommendation or you didn't meet the recommended prerequisite, but you chose to take the course anyway, we do see that going in and we try to support those students. But depending how that goes, we do have students who then drop to the lower level course, the next course down. So maybe they were in an AP level class and they drop to the honors level class or something like that. So we do have some movement between courses, but in the end, we do try to support kids as much as possible who make that choice to challenge themselves.
And we have a decent amount of students that override. I pulled this year to take a look at the number of overrides that we had and the, how the students were doing in the class, right? How many had A's and B's and C's and D's, and F's, although minimal F's. But I did take a look at all of that this year, and we have a significant amount. I mean, in math, it's about 25% of our total population overall is based on an override. So we have lunch and learn also in place, so students can go in and get extra assistance during lunch and learn to try to assist if there's struggle. Reach out to the parents, talk to the students. Yeah.
Cray?
Perfect, and I'll jump off of those questions there, because I did have some questions about recommendations. So what's the first grade that a student is given a recommendation by a teacher to go into a honors AP? I'm assuming 8th, but is
Yeah,
that?
it happens as early as 8th grade, yes.
What is the likelihood, do we have the overrides broken down by grade? Because from my experience, I've noticed that kids, as they get older, of course, they have more opinions about what they can handle and what they can't handle. But for 8th graders, when somebody tells you you can't handle it, that's not something you're gonna override naturally, is what my instinct is, and I wanna know if that's backed by.
So I don't know that we have it necessarily broken down by grade level like that, but I can certainly say there is significantly less opportunity for that going from eighth grade to ninth grade, just because of next course in a sequence, or the students are first starting their high school sequence. So you don't see that as much going from eighth grade to the high school.
But we do have it broken down I have it broken down by grade level as well. And I haven't disaggregated that out, but I actually have that data on my spreadsheet as a piece of information. And I also have by course as well, because it's dependent on course sometimes as well. So I have both. So I haven't actually gone in by grade level, but it's something I could look at. I do have it on my spreadsheets.
And this might be a longer conversation that we have at a different time, but like just looking at the bias that can go into recommendations and trying to unpack that and see the eco damage that can do for kids to say you're not recommended for any honors, and how do we really, I mean, we have to be able to handle hard information and grow, but at the same time, what else is going into those recommendations? And 25% seems really high for over, I know that's all the grades, but that feels
It is.
really high, so.
And our success rate for the overrides aren't
Yeah.
where I would like them to be. In math in particular, our small, they're not. In ELA, we have less overrides. We have a lot less overrides. We're more like about 12% in that area. And most of those students are achieving an A or a B. But there's a lot less students that are overriding. So,
Yeah.
when you think about the double almost, right, the number of math students, then you might think it's double at least, but more than that probably. So math is definitely, and it's interesting, and I know Steve's turning on, but what I also found interesting is that is the area that we have the most amount of on-ramps for. We have an on-ramp every single grade. So we have acceleration points all the way through, starting in fourth grade. And yet still, we're seeing math be such a large number.
As we engage in some strategic planning later this year, those entry points, those on-ramps, we have to, and I know we have emphasized those, but we have to continue to emphasize those, because I still think there are probably some people out there thinking that if a kid doesn't get in that top level math by fifth grade or sixth grade, they're never going to get there. And when I think of my own progression through K-12, it wasn't until much later that things clicked for me for math. So I really think we should spend some sustained time talking about the number of on-ramps that we have, because it has the potential to be the most fluid system that I've seen in any district that I've worked in. And I think that's a real credit to the work that's been done. I think when we look at the success rate of our overrides in math, typically in districts, we see better success in ELA, but I do think that data, we're going to take that to a principals meeting, to an academic council meeting, and kind of unpack why we think those numbers are what they are. And then we'll be coming back at some point this year to kind of talk about how we're going to tighten up that process.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you were saying, that could be a discussion we have in concert with the equity committee.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, just asking why, what is because so much of this presentation, and thank you very much, I really found it interesting, and I super appreciate the summary slide, so thank you for that, is about making kids happier and giving them responsibility to make the choices that they want to make for their life, but also giving them recognition for the work. Because I'll tell you right now, we were laughing over here because I surely will let you know that my senior did not know that those AP Metal Arts courses he was taking were not counted. But I don't care, because it was great and that was a positive experience, but it was probably the hardest he worked in any course because he loved it. Yeah. And so he should get credit for that, especially the dual enrollment. That just made me cringe a little. He got college credit, but not credit from us. So real quick, a couple other questions on this. When we kind of like look at the students and kind of the work that they're doing, is there any way to kind of look at this experiment, put it into place and measure, has it changed our students' stress levels, the pressures that they're under, because we hear this from so many of our kids, and we're seeing this across the country, that our kids are not healthy. And they're not healthy because of how much pressure they put on themselves. All this data shows that they're taking the hardest courses because of that anxiety to get into college and get into a good college. And that's part of the ethos of Lower Merion overall. But is there any way to kind of say, here are the the wellness changes that we're doing that are associated with this, and really helping our kids be productive, well-rounded society members? Because I do believe that there is no long-term data that shows students do better in college from taking AP courses before, which doesn't mean that it doesn't give you a lot of skills. It just doesn't mean there's a correlation between the two, or a causation, I should say.
Right. So I really appreciate that question, because that's kind of the heart of, what we started into this with the redefining success, and thinking about, kids at the heart of that. I think one of the places we would probably be able to see the change fastest would be what courses are students taking, right? So if we see certain courses enrollments going up and other ones going down, really looking at, not that we necessarily want our enrollment in AP or some of those dual enrollment courses or things like that to change, but do we see student enrollment changing and what courses those students are taking? Do we see some of the areas like the arts growing, those type of things? Do we see more students maybe taking the engineering courses because those now count in the new system? Should we move forward? That to me is the place we would see it first, is what are they choosing?
Interesting. And it is also funny that engineering, one of the hardest courses, wasn't counted. I do think this is going to have to think through a communication strategy that isn't just the students, but the parents as well, to really make sure that they understand it. Well, that's not how I did it when I went to school. You hear that so often with schools. But the final question, is the policy committee going to see the same presentation to be able to affect these policy changes?
Just Kimberly again.
Right, so we've discussed this a few times at policy. In fact, we just discussed it the last time we had policy, not the presentation, but the highlights of the changes that were being recommended to CCOB. We just had this conversation last week with them, and we did it prior, I think maybe in like October or November. We had the conversation as well that we were making recommendations, what we were looking at, and policies that we knew would need to be adjusted due to the changes. So they're aware of it, and they know that something will be coming forward if CCOB agrees with these recommendations.
I do think that we can just make sure that the entire board gets this presentation and they see this. I have to tell you, I'm thrilled, and I thank you, Dr. Lilly, for talking about how you could measure the initial impact, right? Because I think having experience doing this in other districts, if the trend stays true, you are going to see
Call
kids.
from Kimberly Garrison.
You will see kids start to take courses that are really passions of theirs. And it'll be, I always say that high school kids vote with their course registration. And what I found doing this work in 2 other districts, the amount of feedback we got from kids actually helped us build new and different courses and made the course offerings more innovative over time. So, and that really breeds student voice into this as well, which I think it has incredible potential here.
Sarah, you got questions?
Thanks. Yeah, I had a question regarding the courses that count towards our GPA and the fact that we don't currently count all of the courses. Is that in line with other area districts, or are we more the outlier, if you know that?
I would say it's safe to say we're an outlier in that. I've personally worked in 5 different school districts in my time. This is the only district I've ever seen that doesn't count all the courses in the GPA calculation. So we're definitely different.
Okay. And then as far as timeline and implementation, when do incoming 9th graders typically go through the course selection process?
So that's coming up very soon. So they start getting the presentations and things like that very soon. They've already done some visits to the high school, so they've seen some of the buildings. But that process happens very soon. Again, there's recommendation process and a choice process that's part of that. But we would want to make sure they're communicated the changes so they're aware.
Yeah, and we would want to put it 2 different scales in the course guide. We have a course guide that's not live right now, so it could be modified depending on what the what the interest is for the board, but we would put that in our course guide as well, because we'd want to show those scales, since it's different for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade versus 9th grade, yeah.
Can I make a request? I know I'm not a board member and I probably shouldn't be talking about it. I gave everyone off tomorrow, so I'm a hero, so I get a little bit of time at the mic. I think it would be great if we put together a 1 or 2 page document that we can put up on making practices public, so that it is really out there and forward facing, so that parents, guardians, kids, everyone understands and can get that information.
We could absolutely do
Yeah,
that.
that'd be great.
Okay, my turn. So just as a baseline, how are grades delivered to our students? Are they given as ABs, grades out of 100, grades that, like, what, when I get my report card as a student, what am I seeing on the paper?
So the grades that you would see on a report card are letter grades.
Okay.
Grades that
With
show.
like plus minus or just A, B, C, D?
No, there's pluses and minuses.
Okay.
Yeah. Same
My
thing
high school
shows
had
up.
a very wacky grading system,
Yeah.
so I have no mental scale for this.
Yeah. Transcript would be similar, but then there's a conversion to the points,
Okay.
the 5.0 scale.
Okay. Does the senior project go into the GPA? Is that like a graded thing if we're now giving it credit, or is it just like pass fail, basically? You did it, you didn't do it.
It's pass-fail, I believe, and it's always had the credit attributed to it. We just need to,
Make it-
change our credit count to align with state, that's all. But it's always had that 0.5 value to it.
Right. So it will continue to be pass fail even if we, okay.
Yeah, and
So-
just to add, a pass-fail doesn't influence the GPA either way.
Right.
Okay. So not to like rain on your Cheerios or mixing metaphors here, but what's the benefit of weighting anything at all? Like, when I went to college, the colleges did all their own grading, all their own averaging. What you gave them as your GPA, you gave them your grades, and they would make their own whatever. And so,
So
like,
could we have Rich Marta come up and speak to that? He actually spoke to our whole entire, that's why I asked him to be here. He spoke to all the department chairs specifically about this topic, because we were grappling with, do you weight GPA at all, right? Like, do we just go unweighted? And so, and I think everybody has the belief that they immediately just reweight everything for you, right? So Rich came in and had the conversation with our whole entire department chair group as we were having this discussion. Rich, can you maybe speak to that?
Sure. So it speaks to rewarding the student for more rigorous work. It also speaks to a higher level when anybody can visually see it, no matter who's reading the transcript. Doesn't mean, somebody, a manager at a grocery store is going to hire a student or a college. It doesn't matter. It shows that somebody did something more. The difference will come, in the end, it will come down to the work that the student would be required to do. Because when you're giving more power, you're giving more points, the expectation is there's going to be more rigor, there's going to be more work, if you will. And again, it's seen and felt very regularly when it's absent that they didn't do as much as somebody else did. So it speaks to rigor, it speaks to the work that a student would have to put forth, the caliber of work that is expected.
and so generally when students are applying for college, are they asked to provide both a weighted and an unweighted GPA or an unweighted transcript? How do we present, how do those get presented to
So
college?
we, as a district, give out the weighted score only. That's our choice. We assign a weighted score. Schools can ask for them, and if they ask for them,
Do they usually?
no, but they could.
Right.
And we would just hand recalculate for them and give it to them.
Interesting.
So it's done, through the powers, the student information system. It's all calculations in there, what teachers put in, it comes out, and that's what's on the transcript. So where there are potentially two different types of grade point averages, we only report one, and that's on our profile too.
And so that's information we would then share with college colleges that
That's
are.
what it's on our profile. So
Yeah,
anybody reading the
so-
application should be reading the profile.
Yeah, and so they would be able to see, okay, we rate
Absolutely.
these, okay, so,
And it's in our program planning guide also.
interesting.
Could you
I'll be in
also
this-
just quickly talk about the idea that colleges take and they just redo everybody's transcripts, which I think is a common belief?
Yeah, so for as many different school districts calculate a GPA, so do colleges. So, we're moving to all grades counting in the GPA. Well, some colleges will definitely take out phys ed and health. That's their choice. Some only calculate the 5 core courses. Some will give weight to AP, IB, dual enrollment. Some don't. Every school has a enrollment mission, and the admissions officers follow what is expected of them when they're evaluating a transcript, evaluating a student.
Yeah, I think my own mental calculus is a little screwy on it because my high school, the highest GPA that you could get was 95 out of 100 if you got perfect scores in every class you took. And so my mental calculus of how that happens is a little different. I agree. I wanted to say that we're going to see a lot more students taking arts electives. I think that's really fantastic. Lots and lots of nerdy art kids and not nerdy art kids like me taking lots and lots of fun stuff in high school. It was a really meaningful experience. And I think even if those AP teachers are concerned that we might see fewer students in the core 5 AP courses, that you might have students taking our AP courses that we offer in our non-core things. So we may see a redistribution of AP tests. And I just wanted to reiterate what Curry said, that I think that this is a really opportune time for a pre-test, post-test on our mental health status of our students. We have this natural thing where we're doing a transition, and to survey that and then to use that data of what has changed, what our different enrollment is changing over that course. We know exactly what's changing, and then we can test after that. And I think that'll be really valuable information. I know we've sort of struggled as a district to get at how our kids are feeling beyond the general sense that it's really, really hard right now. So I think that that's an important thing that I know we do a lot of surveying, but I think that's an important thing to look at.
So if I may just expand on that.
Absolutely.
It's just not isolated to GPAs. For many years now, I'm going to say about roughly 8 years, that's all we have been talking about, what we can do to improve the student climate, the student mental health, the student self-awareness. Lunch and Learn is definitely a product of that. The mid-year experience is a product of that. GPA, now it's taken us longer with many more conversations, as you imagine they would when you're dealing with faculty. It takes longer to get us there. So we've done an awful lot in this district that we should be very proud of.
Absolutely.
To really look at all the needs of all the students. Just like on-ramps, for example, that is done in the summer, and then somebody can focus just primarily on that instead of laboring on top of that in their normal academic year. So there's a lot of things we have done, and this is just one more, probably one of the last ones, but it's probably the one that needed the most conversation about.
I absolutely agree, and I didn't say that to mean in any way to discredit all the effort. I have sat in these meetings for 5 years. I know you guys have been doing fantastic work, and you all really care. This team is a team of really competent people that really cares about what they're doing. It just seemed like a real opportune moment where we might see that shift, and it would allow us for sort of to take advantage of a situation. I agree. Also, you touched on Lunch and Learn. I just wanted to make a note. We talk a lot about Lunch and Learn, and people don't necessarily have, I don't even know 100% what goes on in Lunch and Learn. I think that would be a really exceptional thing for us to get a presentation about, what the deal with Lunch and Learn is in this committee. I think that would be really helpful to the community. And the last thing I wanted to bring up was, what is the process for getting this approved? Are we voting to pass this on in this committee? Does it get approved in the policy committee? Does it get approved in the full board? What's our deal?
So as superintendent, I just need a polite nod from all of you that you all agree with this. And I think what I'm hearing tonight, I'm hearing polite nods. And I think as we think about
It's been a long, short week.
It's day and a half, it's been really rough. As we think about policy work that needs to be done, I believe it's more work in our ARs than in our actual policies. So I would anticipate that between now and our next policy meeting, we'll be revising those ARs and then taking those ARs to the policy committee so that the committee can look at, I'm looking at Mrs. Rubin as she's one of our policy members.
And that then gets approved by the full board at a business meeting.
So only the policies do, not the administrative
Not the
regulations,
ARs.
but
The
we still
ARs
bring it,
get
right?
polite nods
Yeah.
at the policy committee. See, you can do this a long
And I-
time and still not be
And I
used
see,
to the maze.
and I see Ms. Schaefer back there just so excited because we know her affinity for policy is on point.
Find you a partner the way that loves you the way that Ms. Schaefer loves policy. Do we have anybody else with any other? Yes. Oh, Ms. Garrison, did you have any comments or questions that you wanted to add to our discussion?
Well, most of you have asked questions that I was already interested in. But I did have one question. What are the three top colleges that most Lower Merion students attend if they go to college?
Don't exactly quote me, but I will probably tell you always in the top 5 are Penn State University, Temple University, Drexel University. They're all local. You know, the volume, I'm speaking, volume, most kids apply to these schools. Even if you're
Okay.
even if you're the top student, you might still put in an application to the University of Pittsburgh or Penn State University to get into the honors program or to get into a research program. So, and that's the other side of the coin. Students are applying upwards of 10 colleges or more. We try them to be more, specific, but the time and the ease it takes to do an application today than when any of us were in school is a lot easier. So they tend to apply to a lot more schools.
Oh, so with a Common App, you don't have to pay for each application anymore?
Yes, you do. Sure.
Oh,
The only
okay.
the only advantage of the Common App is you do one application. It goes to multiple schools. You're paying
I
for
see.
multiple schools' applications. Yeah, I'm not talking about expensive at all because they all have a cost to them.
Okay, I was going, but maybe perhaps that had been eliminated, okay. Okay, well, thank you.
I thought of one more question. Oh, and you thought of one more question? I was wondering if most of the AP courses we're offering are courses that our students are then getting college credit for.
So that's a great question, and like everything, the answer is going to be it depends. So there's multiple ways a university accepts or uses the AP credit. They all use it to admit the student,
Right.
but how they use the credit once the student is admitted is very different. So, for instance, some do not take any AP courses in the subject area that the student's going to major in. So if you, for instance, were going to be pre-med and you took calculus AB and you got a 5, many colleges make you take calculus at the college level with them, even though you got a 5 on the calculus. Okay? Then the opposite would be true. If you were an English major, maybe in some schools, and you took AP, AB, calculus, they'd probably throw you a party and give you as much credit as you could because you were an English major. They took math. They took higher math. So it's very different. Some recognize it. Some use it. It affects the dollar value of a student's tuition. And
That's what I was thinking of.
where a lot of colleges are having struggles with currently today.
And as someone who entered college with 7 AP credits and graduated with exactly 121 credits, which was the requirement, it was a really big deal for me to have those AP credits, even though neither of them actually counted for anything I wanted to take in there. So,
And then some would apply to the degree program and some don't apply to their degree program. Some do it as elective. So every school, college, then you have the The
And then it depends
institution
based
and
on
then the
what grade
college,
they
the
get on
program
the
within
test.
the university can have a different policy too. So the answer is the student really needs to do some research at that level if they are expecting to advance themselves or get an advanced standing
Is
for
there any
taking this
way
course.
for a student to communicate with a college or university they'd be interested in attending and be like, should I take this AP? Like, if I take this AP credit, if class, will I get credit at your school? Or like,
Some have it posted on their website and some,
is that something our
Well-
college office would assist students with if they wanted to get that information, just because they have contacts at these schools?
they could, yeah, there's lots of ways they can do it. There's usually a representative, a college admissions counselor, for a geographic area for a set of schools. That person would be the lead, or sometimes there's just a generic email box that you can just type in your questions or do it. Don't forget that, we have well over 100 schools visit our Harrington and LM every year. And then, all the expertise that we have with our career and college counselors too.
Okay,
Can I just add quick, just because I have two kids in college, so I'm gone through this recently. Most colleges, even the ones you're applying to, do have a page where you can go and see how AP courses will transfer in.
nice.
They typically, you just put it in and it says, this is what score you need. If you get this score, it counts for this course here at the college. If you get this score, it counts for this. If you get these scores, it doesn't count at all. So you can pretty much investigate that at most colleges on your own just by searching for AP on their website.
Fantastic. Curry, did you have another?
Just real quick on that, and again, a part of the reasons why they're not accepting AP courses is because it doesn't give them the framework that they need to be successful in college. I don't want it to be just about the money, just to be honest with you, and the data shows that. But what I love about this is that there are over 30 AP courses that kids can take in schools that the College Board offers. So often those electives might be the ones that they do accept as college credits. So that's really great. I just wanted to nod to the senior project and that you're keeping the senior project and that you're giving credit for it, because I think that is a very important thing. It's much more a reality of portfolios of the world and having, those skills that you really need to be successful in a workforce. And going back to what you said earlier about we're doing a lot to ensure that our kids are well-rounded and happy, I think that's a great example of it. And I feel like the state requirements, alternative requirements for high school graduation are almost looking to see like how more kids can do things like this. It's not always through that systematic way, and that we're giving all of our students the opportunity to be exposed in some way to portfolio work is fantastic. I just forgot to mention that, and it's a really important thing we do.
I'm sorry, I have another question. With regard to senior project, this is something that I wanted to ask. Is there a specific kind of set of courses that have to be, that the project has to focus on, or could it be health or phys ed?
It's actually not based on coursework. So our students, the beginning of May, all of our seniors go out and do a senior project and then they present their work. So, and there's many pathways they could take, like community service is one of the pathways they could take, but they actually go in shadow work during that time. So it's not necessarily based on like phys ed as a course or a course in particular.
Got it, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, I think that is all of our questions.
Oh, I have one more question.
Kimberly has one more. And Jill, and we have some community questions. So Kimberly, you go for it, and then we'll go to community comments.
Is the CLEP exam still around, the college level examination program?
It is, and that's even more specific to the institution if they're going to accept, if they use the test or if they're going to accept the credit. But yes, it is around.
Are students made aware of the CLEP?
It's not a high school product. It's really a college product. High school students don't have an opportunity to CLEP until they reach the college that they're attending. It's not something they do before.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. If we have any community members that want to come up and speak, Ms. Alschuler. How did I know your name? I missed you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Jill Altschuler from Marion Station. In terms of honors and AP classes, I don't know how many. We have in terms of AP classes that don't have an honors option. I'm just curious about, well, I know like statistics, I think, is one example, maybe. So if you're not interested in taking an AP class, then you have to take college prep, and ends up being light work.
That's we can actually look and get the number and put that up. That's, in the districts that I've been in, there typically are a handful of courses. Statistics is a really good example. It's the AP statistics curriculum and how you would differentiate that between honors and AP. There really isn't a vast difference, which is why most high schools don't have an honors option for that. AP statistics is a course that if a student isn't really sure, if they want to dip their toes into an AP course and they have some good math skills, that's one that I always recommend that kids take. Not that it's necessarily a safe option, but I have to be honest with you, I think in many ways statistics is more applicable to everyday life for most of us than calculus is. So
Right.
I would think, I'll look at our peer districts, but I would say or think that most of them don't have the honors option for that, but we can look and see how many
Okay.
how many we don't have the honors option.
Can I just add one thing to that? And that would be that courses where there are 3 levels, honors, AP, or CP, honors, and AP, they typically aren't courses that compete against each other for the same students. So for example, in biology, college prep biology or honors biology are taken prior to a student taking AP biology. So they're not 3 levels of the same course that are all a choice, all 3 at the same time.
Right.
Students would take one of those levels prior to taking one of the others.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, so at that point, would that actually be a prerequisite to take AP Bio? Would you have to have taken honors or CP Bio to be able to take?
So yes, but really because it's a state requirement for bio.
Okay. Cool. Yes, I think we definitely need to work on our verbiage around prerequisites.
I was like prerequisite, I was looking at.
I want to go on the record and say that it would be great to have some clarification about what might be state requirement and what might not be. Because if it is an actual state requirement, then it's different than a recommendation.
And I think, are there some classes that are combined honors CP?
Yes, that is true.
And how does that, how do the honors levels kids do they get what they really need out of it?
It's funny that you asked that question. Today I had that, we were with the English teachers today at the high school level and having a conversation about how they actually work. And I would say yes, the answer is yes to that. That they differentiate in the classroom. And so assignments might look a little different. Students know, even from a grading perspective, that it looks a little different, but they differentiate in those rooms. I felt very good about that class. We actually had a conversation about what it might look like moving forward as well.
Okay. I guess is there a way to look at that across the board and make sure that that's the case? And I just have heard, and I don't have examples with me because I wasn't prepared I didn't see the slideshow ahead of time.
As we're actually building something called the Lower Marion Learning Model, which is going to house all of our teaching and learning documents, all of our curriculum. And one of the things we're putting in there are best practices. I anticipate that there will be a section in that document that will be this document is really for the educators in the system, in the organization. And that section will really outline clear expectations of the district for teachers that are teaching the combined sections, for sure.
Okay.
I would just add that it's limited to what subject areas we do it in. I believe it is in world language and English. In social studies.
And social studies as well. And then also elective classes. So it's not every subject area, but electives as well. Like, so you might see it in an art class or
True.
music theory class and so forth. So it's more prevalent than that, than
Okay.
just, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's, can only speak from my experience from my daughter, and she's said that it's really been pretty much the same, taught at the same level and the same amount of work, the one social studies class that she's taking. So, not that she's complaining, but, And then the senior project, in theory, is obviously a potentially great opportunity. I've heard way too many examples of kids who just do, pretty light work, like learning how to knit or something, or maybe set up a 2-day clinic for a certain sport, like out of all that whole period of time. And so it just really makes me wonder what the expectations are and how we can make sure the kids are really making the most, all the kids are making the most out of these projects, to make it pretty meaningful. They're total senioritis, but I think it is a great way to end the year instead of in the classroom and taking tests, but it doesn't seem like they're really held accountable for doing really meaningful, important work. It's kind of embarrassing.
I'll say as someone who's been knitting for decades, that learning to knit is not something to necessarily,
Well, I know because my friend, she was like, yeah, she'd come in my house and ask me to teach her how to knit for an hour. And it was, I don't know. Is that okay?
I
Okay.
won't speak one way or another, but if students have the freedom to choose something that they feel is fulfilling, then
Was that?
I don't know
was-
exactly
yeah,
what the value judgment on that can or should be.
Right.
So there are prerequisites that have to happen, including how many hours have to. I'm gonna get rid of that word in my vocabulary, right? But there are requirements. How about there's requirements for it? Yeah.
As a whole, the word, I like language, I'm an English minor. But I think it's important to recognize
Yeah.
that some of these words have certain
Yeah,
connotations.
100%. So there are requirements. There's the hours requirement that people have to sign off on, that they work with, like the students work with. There are mentors. Every child is assigned a mentor that actually tracks them, meets with them regularly. It starts well before the seniors even go out for senior project. Part of it is actually creation of the project as well. So there's a whole entire handbook. We have one staff member in both buildings that really oversees it as well. But every student has a staff member advisor attached to them with requirements, including hours and what has to be produced through the whole entire thing. But it is a project, and students do have choice in the whole thing and voice in the project as well. That is a true statement.
And I would also caution against sort of hearing one story and taking that as the experience globally, because in the
Right. I wasn't prepared with examples.
No,
'cause I didn't- yeah.
I'm just saying
But
that if
I've heard many
we don't
over the
want to
years.
disparage a really, frankly, well-regarded program that, in the same way that you might have heard some horror stories, I've heard some kids that absolutely love doing
sure.
their senior projects and have
Absolutely.
done things that were meaningful to them. So I think that,
So let me just say that how it's approached is students can pick a theme. It could be volunteerism. It could be something they want to learn new that they've never done or tried before. It could be something related to a career that they're interested in or a career they'd like to research. So there are a lot of paths a student takes when they're developing their plan. And on top of the things that Dr. McLean mentioned, there's also a presentation at the end. So like when you talk about knitting, there's going to have to be a product shown, as good or bad as it could be, at the end of that to show this is what I've done in the time that I had that I learned this. So there are steps, there are checks and balances. Does every student do it to the best of their ability? I don't know about that.
But it's really helpful that you asked that question, because I think we're just talking about senior project, and unless you're exposed to it, you really don't know what it can be. And you're right. I'm sure, just like any internship, you see the range, you see the great range. But yeah, it's really helpful to ask those questions and see kind of what they move forward.
Yeah.
Hopefully she's still knitting.
Yeah, right. And I didn't mean to disparage you.
I know,
Trust
I
me.
know,
It's like-
yeah, I know.
yeah, okay, I think that's it. That's
but
it.
after being called an old lady since I was 16 years old, I'm just a little touchy about it. All right. And did you have something else you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, I just had one follow-up based on your comments about the combined courses. Just wondering kind of what the rationale is for having combined courses. Is it when we don't have enough students interested in a certain level, that then we kind of join them together. And then for the combined courses, are the students who are taking it as an honors class getting those weighted GPAs, and the students who are taking it as college prep not? Like, how does that work? Right, so it is weighted, so depending on how the course is taken, if it's taken at the honors level, they get the honors credit for it. If it's at a CP level, they get the CP level. I would say it's a combination of that. Sometimes it's because we want to make sure that we're running a few art classes, the teachers are able to differentiate. That's something they do on a normal basis in those courses and have always. I mean, at least during even my time growing up. And so you'll see some of that. It's intentional as well, because we're looking to make sure that we're blending our classes together, our students are pushed, and that they see just everybody together. So it's an intentional move from an equity lens as well. Yep.
I was going to say, there's a ton of research out of Vanderbilt showing that all kids' grades rise when you have that cross connection and the pairing of the students. So they're not isolated, over here is honors and over here is not. It's been fascinating research. I want to say it's going on like 15 years now too. So very, very strong, validated research on those blended levels.
And our teachers are thoughtful. I mean, the conversation was robust today about how does it happen? What does it look like? I felt really good about it walking out, but they're thoughtful about the assignments. They're thoughtful about how they match up students. And so they really, really do work to make sure that it's productive for all the students in that classroom.
And I'd imagine it probably gives a kid that took that class, a blended class as CP, more confidence if they did well to be able to go ahead and take that step to take honors the next semester or the next time they wanted to take a course. And that. Fantastic discussion. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to make note, again, this is not our usual time. CCOB will be moving to Mondays. Monday. Our next meeting will be Monday, February 12th at 7 p.m. in this room. I will see all of you here in 1 month. Good night.